The day after the divorce, she checked into a cheap motel with her baby, unaware the man next door. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, blurring the neon lights of the roadside motel. Sarah sat behind the steering wheel of her beat-up car, staring at the dimly lit sign that read vacancy. Her 6-month-old baby, Emma, stirred softly in the back seat, whimpering in her sleep. Sarah's fingers trembled on the steering wheel, not from the cold, but from the weight of everything that had happened. She had just signed the divorce papers that morning, papers that ended not just her marriage, but the life she thought she was building. The man she loved had left her for someone else, taking with him the home, the security, and the future they once planned. She had nothing now, no house, no money except the last $200 in her purse, and no place to go. All she had was her baby, and that was enough reason to keep moving. If you'd seen her that night, you would never have guessed how much pain she carried. You would never have guessed that the man in the next room would change everything, not just for her, but for Emma too. Sarah stepped into the motel lobby, the smell of cigarette smoke and stale coffee hitting her immediately. The receptionist barely looked up from his newspaper. "Room for one night," Sarah said, her voice soft but steady. She held Emma close, the baby's head resting against her chest. The man behind the counter gave her a look, one that seemed to question how a young woman with a baby ended up in a place like this. But Sarah didn't care. She just needed a roof over their heads, even if only for a night. The struggle begins. The room was small and smelled faintly of mildew. The wallpaper peeled at the corners, and the bed creaked when she set Emma down. Sarah collapsed beside her daughter, staring at the ceiling. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Emma deserved a strong mother, not one who crumbled under pressure. As she tried to calm herself, she heard faint coughing from the next room. Then, a voice, a man's voice, murmuring something she couldn't quite make out. She ignored it at first, but as the night grew colder and quieter, she noticed it again. A soft groan, followed by silence. The man next door. The next morning, Sarah stepped outside to grab some air, Emma cradled in her arms. That's when she saw him, a man in his early 30s, sitting on the steps of the room next to hers. He looked tired, his face pale, his eyes shadowed with something Sarah couldn't quite define. He glanced at her and gave a faint smile. "Cute baby," he said. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken much lately. "Thanks," Sarah replied, holding Emma a little tighter. She wasn't used to talking to strangers, especially now when her life felt so fragile. "Rough night?" he asked, noticing the exhaustion on her face. Sarah hesitated but finally nodded. "You could say that. Two broken souls." His name was David. He had checked into the motel 2 weeks ago after losing his job and his apartment. Life had hit him hard, too. He was living out of his car before scraping together enough for this rundown motel. He didn't ask about Sarah's story, but something in his tone and eyes made her feel seen. Over the next few days, they would cross paths often. David would offer to hold Emma while Sarah carried her groceries. He'd sit on the motel steps and talk to her about small things, like the weather, or how the coffee machine in the lobby was always broken. But Sarah noticed things about him too. The way he winced when he coughed. The way he seemed to be hiding pain behind his smile. The turning point. One evening, after putting Emma to sleep, Sarah found David sitting outside in the rain, shivering. He looked pale, almost feverish. Instinctively, she grabbed an extra blanket from her room and draped it over him. "You're burning up," she said, feeling his forehead. "I'm fine," he lied, but she could see the truth in his weak smile. Sarah didn't know why she cared. Maybe because she knew what it felt like to be broken, to feel like no one in the world would notice if you disappeared. She brought him inside her room, made him some instant soup, and insisted he rest. It was the first time she'd let someone into her space since the divorce. Healing together. Over the next week, Sarah and David formed an unlikely bond. He helped her fix the squeaky motel door. She shared her leftover food with him. They talked, really talked, about life, mistakes, and dreams that seemed out of reach. David confessed that he had once been a musician, traveling from city to city, but after his band broke up, he fell into a spiral of odd jobs and loneliness. Sarah shared how her ex-husband left when she needed him most, and how she feared she wasn't strong enough to raise Emma alone. "You're stronger than you think," David told her one night. "I can see it in the way you look at her. You'd burn down the world for that little girl." His words struck her deeply. The moment of hope. By the end of the second week, Sarah's last $200 had almost run out. She didn't know how much longer she could stay. But David, despite his own struggles, came to her with a plan. "I know a friend who runs a cafe downtown," he said. "She's looking for help. I can talk to her about a job for you." Sarah hesitated. She hadn't worked since Emma was born, but she knew she couldn't survive like this forever. With David's encouragement, she took the job. It was just a few hours a day, but it gave her enough to pay for food and start saving. David, on the other hand, began playing music again at a small bar nearby. He told Sarah he hadn't felt this alive in years. The message. Months later, Sarah and David were no longer two broken souls in a cheap motel. Sarah had found a small apartment. David had started recording music again, this time with a confidence he'd thought was lost. On Emma's first birthday, they stood together in Sarah's tiny kitchen, watching the little girl smash cake with her hands. Sarah looked at David and realized something profound. Sometimes, life breaks you down so it can rebuild you with stronger pieces. That night, as Sarah tucked Emma into bed, she thought about the man in the next room. The stranger she hadn't known would become her lifeline. Their paths crossed when they were both lost, but together, they found something worth living for. And that's the thing about life, sometimes the people who save us are the ones we least expect.